Central to the Portals project is the inquiry about the future and the evolutionary change underway. We seek to perceive what is emerging at the edge of the human experience, to decode and integrate insights about how we humans are evolving through this liminal transition. Chris Bache is a professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, where he taught for 33 years. A fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Chris is the author of The Living Classroom, Teaching and Collective Consciousness, and of Dark Night, Early Dawn, Steps to a Deep Ecology of Mind, and his third book, LSD and The Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, where Chris describes his 20 years of intensive work through 73 LSD sessions. In the interest of transparency, I have never touched LSD and never touched any psychedelic or any mushroom. My own 42 years of journey to unlock the universal human potential was centered on the premise that the human brain, when we are open to the blessing realms, is the most advanced chemistry and pharmaceutical production unit in the universe. And I've applied my spiritual and development search in ways that promote naturally arising states and inner conductivity. So we are not here to recommend that you should do anything. I've invited Chris because, Chris, of your rigor and focused inquiry, which are profound, and your account where you frame insights and perspectives that are of great interest as we seek to appreciate what is emerging at the edge of human consciousness. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
So you have already lived several lifetimes in this one life. You've had a full academic career, you published 3 books, you've raised a family and 3 children, and alongside all of this, you've done this intense 20 years research work. So let me first ask, what is the portal you are in right now? What is the inquiry you're working on at this time?
Well, when I published LSD and the Mind of the Universe, or as I prefer to call it, Diamonds from Heaven, that's its name for me. When I published that, I felt like I had accomplished my life's work. I mean, after a long career of teaching, as a philosopher of religion, this was my most important gift to the history of philosophical inquiry into the deep structure of existence. And that brought with it a tremendous sense of closure and relaxation. And since the book has come out into the world 3 years ago now, just about 3 years, I've just been content to follow the book out into the world and to follow into conversations that people want to have around the issues that have come up with the book. I don't have any agenda. I don't have any felt need to achieve anything. I have moved to North Carolina in the last 3 years. And so I've been doing a lot of yard work. My hands are in the soil and all those basic things. I have children and grandchildren that I love to stay in touch with as often as I can. They live farther away. They're not close by, so that takes some work. So I'm kind of growing old in a comfortable place. I am cultivating a way of spiritual practice that builds upon the systematic remembering of the experiences that I had on the 73 days covered in my book. And those are living memories for me. And I'm experimenting with how to use those memories to more deeply absorb and integrate the realities that I touched very intimately on those session days.
So we will pick up this thread, which is fascinating. You're describing a condition where a memory is not frozen in time. It's a living stream of intelligence that continues to inform you even into the here and now. And we will pick this up as we unfold the conversation. In his foreword to your book, Ervin Laszlo writes, "This is one of the most insightful and significant books I have ever read. But to understand its significance, one must be willing to entertain three premises. A, there is an intelligence behind the things that exist in the universe. B, that there is purpose exhibited by this intelligence. And C, that it is humanly possible to access some elements of this intelligence and learn some aspects of its purpose." So I'm interested, given the way you're describing where you are, how is this deliberation unfolding for you in terms of your belief, your feeling about these three premises? A, that the universe is an intelligent place, that there is an inherent or latent purpose, and that we actually have as humans the capacity to unpack or to connect or to decode both.
Those premises are absolutely foundational to my lived reality these days. The worldview that I was educated in graduate school is the scientific worldview, or the early 20th century scientific worldview, that the world is basically a fantastic machine. It has no innate intelligence. Intelligence is a lucky accident that sprung up somewhere along the way, that our existence is accidental, it's not purposive, and that when we die, when our brain ceases to function correctly, then our consciousness disappears, and so there is no existential meaning or significance to our lives. And all of those assumptions have been overturned in my psychedelic work. What I found is that by dissolving into the deeper levels of my own mind, I opened beyond my own personal existence into the mind of the universe itself. And in that process, repeatedly, over and over again, through many years, came into communion with an intelligence that was profound, just extraordinarily brilliant and vast beyond imagination, and compassionate beyond measure. And so returning to that intelligence and drinking from it, and being willing to undergo very challenging processes of initiation, but always being rewarded with deeper intimacy with this intelligence, that the universe I now live in is saturated with intelligence at all the levels I can see and at levels I can't see. The world I live in intellectually and emotionally is a world of genius unfolding itself systematically over vast epochs of time. And it's also a world in which humanity's participation in this creative endeavor is not a participation that's limited to a 100-year lifetime or a one single lifetime, but it's a participation that continues lifetime after lifetime after lifetime through the process that we classically have known as reincarnation. But it's larger than that. It's that our entire species and the development of this planet and this solar system and this galaxy is all part of an exquisite, purposeful, systematic unfolding of the creative power of this creative intelligence. And I hesitate to call it God or call it the divine, because as a professor of religious studies, I know how that word has been used, and I know what it has come to mean in different cultures around the world. And while part of it is good and beautiful, so many other parts of it are limiting. So I prefer to speak in terms of the creative intelligence of the universe. The intelligence that is behind existence, and the intelligence that is inside existence, expressing itself in the complexity of life.
So in many ways, you have just given us the condensed preview version of the everything we are about to unfold in the next hour and so on, which is beautiful. It's exactly what I was hoping we can do. Give the people that join us a sense on the front end of what we are about to unfold. In the way you just described that, you were again describing three layers there as you talked about. First, making contact with this intelligence, appreciating this intelligence, and then you're describing that as you engage with that intelligence, there is an aspect of communion, a fuller whole person experience, and then deeper inside that you discover the sense of compassion and intimacy. So, and you say that the universe is interested in our experience of it. What do you believe about why that is the case?
Well, first of all, part of my experience has been the classic teaching in some of the Eastern traditions that the essence of the individual is the same as the essence of the totality, that Atman is Brahman, that our nature is the nature of the divine, which is the nature of reality itself. So it's not completely true to think of this in terms of a duality between me and it. At a deeper level, my being is a fractal emanation, manifestation of its reality, of its truth. So our relationship is it's deeply essential and mutually participating right from the start. But in terms of function, in terms of Chris Bache's actual function, I am so small and it is so vast that, relatively speaking, there's a relative duality involved. And of course, it's not just the small bit and the totality, but between the totality and my little small bit, there's layers and layers and layers and layers. It's a very, very complex organic system of massive scale. So to get to the focus of your question, my experience has been that as I went through my spiritual work and went through my spiritual practice, psychedelic practice, and went through the initiations and the cycles of death and rebirth that I'm sure we'll talk to later, and opened into periods where I would spend hours absorbed in communion and dialogue or with this intelligence. And then as I would begin to get smaller and come back into my normal shape and size, so there was a window that would open and stay open for hours, and then a window that would close, I repeatedly had the sense of that this intelligence was so pleased to have this opportunity to share, to commune, to convey it, not with me, but with humanity as a whole, that we are just getting, after 13.7 billion years, we are just getting able to begin to embrace, to open up to the scale of the intelligence of the universe. So that for 13.7 billion years, this intelligence has been creating this universe, this magnificent garden, and holding it while we evolve slowly to the point where we can just begin to become aware of what it has been doing. And it seems to be so pleased to be able to share consciously what it has previously been constructing unconsciously.
The idea of seeing ourselves as a fractal of the whole inside a nested reality that is interpenetrating carries some powerful propositions and ideas that we will unfold, and you unfold in your book, because what it says is that as I change in myself, as you change in yourself, because we are a fractal of the whole, we in some way facilitate and catalyze a bigger change. So we are participant to this unfolding gigantic story that you're describing.
Absolutely. We are participants. We are an expression of the creative process. We are continuance of the creative process, and we are learning to be generators, more and more conscious generators of the creative process. Yes.
So would it be right to say that when you suggest and when we contemplate that the universe is interested in us, in humanity, that it's a form of the universe interest in itself, in its own evolution, that it comes to experience through its beloved human?
I think so. I think that's widely viewed insight in many of the mystical traditions of the world, that there's a deep collaboration, and this intelligence is interested in its expansion, and we are in some ways at this point in time one of the cutting edges of its expansion, its learning.
Well, so let's begin to explore a little into and through the journey just there, to pick up on your description that we are at the leading edge of something that's evolving through this universe. And you describe in Session 6 the vast community of explorers. And you write, I experienced explorers in different fields of learning as part of a vast cooperative enterprise. What do you believe about, and how did you experience then, and when you reflect now on this community of explorers? I get a visual sense of people who are in different spaces and domains, right at the edge, the cutting edge of discovery.
Well, as I was first trained as an historian, and then in philosophy of religion. And so I spent, years and years and years studying some of the great thinkers in history in these fields. And so I had a real sense of great beings and great autobiographies who have contributed systematically to the tapestry of learning that I was an inheritor of in various ways. And this session was really about, it was helping liberate me from a felt sense of responsibility to the intellectual lineages that I had been educated into. It was as if I was above the earth and I was watching these beings through time, through history, make their great contributions to art and literature and science and philosophy and theology. And usually I would be just intimidated by genius, how great they were. But here I felt myself as a young learner entering the company of older learners and entering into the fellowship of learning. But then the next step was, I came to see, I was given a survey of all the knowledge that I had acquired through all the years of college and graduate school. And I was given a series of lessons which taught me the incompleteness of this knowledge. And then I was shown a new way of doing philosophy that was opening in my life with this work. And I believe that psychedelics represent a revolution in the way of doing philosophy, not just certain insights into consciousness, but how philosophy can be done. And this new way is to first systematically expand the boundaries of experience, to enter into non-ordinary states of consciousness, which of course humanity has been doing for thousands and thousands of years through meditation, yoga, trance dance, and also psychedelics. But moving into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, in my case with psychedelics, paying very careful and critical attention to what happens in those experiences, come back and record them very precisely, as exactly as possible within 24 hours, and then to reflect on them, to integrate them with bodies of knowledge and other disciplines, and to compare them to the experiences that other people are having in these states. And that by systematically expanding and contracting consciousness in this way, but not just having interesting experiences, that intellectually digesting those experiences, internalizing those experiences, what I think we're able to do is that we can begin to think about things and to understand things and talk about things that previously most human beings could never talk about, could never envision. Only the most sophisticated mystics and the most esoteric traditions could have access to some of these domains. But with psychedelics, if they are handled responsibly and conscientiously, even a person of modest means can have access to this reality, these realities, and begin to understand some of the workings of the universe that are revealed through these states. Because as our mind changes its sensitivity, we begin to be able to experience different aspects of the cosmos. So it's like the color spectrum. We see a certain portion of the visible spectrum, but when we could slide our awareness to a different portion of the spectrum, a different world of color opens to us. The same way with consciousness. So this session gave me was intellectual permission to not try to prove everything to the satisfaction of my peers, but to rather begin a new methodology in philosophy that may not be recognized for generations. And it would take the rest of my life to really carry out. And that's why I did this work for 20 years of psychedelic exploration. And then I spent another 20 years thinking about and digesting those experiences before publishing Diamonds from Heaven.
Would it be correct to say that, so in any of the pathways to altered states, that whatever we come into contact with, whether you view it as a stream of intelligence or whatever way you frame this, that it depends still on the frame of reference that you have cultivated before. So in your case, your various studies and research and work in philosophy and religion provided, in a way, inner scaffolds, inner structures for the experience that you were going through by way of translation. That is to say, if somebody else showed up through an adjacent experience, but with different scaffolds, with different inner topography, they would be interpreting their experience possibly differently. How would you restate what I'm trying to get to and sense there?
Good point, and really an important thing to consider. The question is not just whether they would interpret their experiences differently, but would they actually be having different experiences because their conditioning was different going into the experiences. This is a discussion that I've had with Ken Ring, one of the founders of near-death episode research and the author of a number of books. And he and I published our dialogue around this particular point in an article called Are Deep Psychedelic Experiences Trustable? Do they simply reflect the conditioning of the personal psyche or even the collective psyche, or do they actually go beyond one's conditioning and give us access to something truly veridical about the universe? And I want to honor both sides of this discussion, because I subscribe to what some have called a participatory model of spiritual experience, which means these experiences are not like apples hanging on the cosmic tree that you just reach up and pluck, and they're just there for the taking, and anybody can reach up and pluck them and it's there for the taking. It's a much more complex dynamic that's involved. And I'll explain that in a minute, but first I want to say that my conditioning was shattered again and again and again as I took this journey. And I think that's true for people who work systematically with these states, that in the beginning, our conditioning has a strong coloring and shaping role. And simply our personal history has a shaping role. But very quickly, after several years, you reach a point where you get past all of the conditioning that you've had, even from birth forward, and you're literally, your entire physical existence collapses. And in that collapse, one moves beyond territory that you've ever known intellectually. Or I think my academic background helped me understand what I was experiencing, but did not structure what I was experiencing. I was often wished that I had PhDs in physics and astrophysics, and particularly to better understand some of the phenomena that I was being shown. But instead of picking an apple from a tree, I think it's something like this. As I have experienced it, the mind of the cosmos, the mind of the universe, is an infinite lake of infinite potential, capable of giving us infinite variety of experiences. And our mind acts like a seed catalyst, that we drop it into this infinite potential, and it catalyzes a certain response, a certain set of experiences, which reflect that seed crystal. As we internalize those experiences, we go through a process of purification and transformation, which changes the nature of our individual consciousness, so that later, when we return to that infinite lake, the seed crystal that we drop into it has been changed, expanded, and it precipitates a different set of experiences out of its infinite potential. This is what I mean by it's a participatory cosmology, a participatory model. And it's not that our consciousness creates or dictates what emerges. It's just that there is a complicated feedback process that's going. And the more we go into this, the more we do it, the more new and new and new frontiers begin to open that are far beyond anything we could imagine, beyond anything, even against many of the things that we've been taught. It's new territory. And then comes the task of trying to make sense of what it was that you experienced. And these experiences are kind of sequential. It's like exploring new territory. So one experience leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another, in a complex, overlapping manner. So in the end, you have to examine the structure of the whole trajectory of experiences, because it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
It's a puzzle.
Yeah.
There is a potent way you describe the very thing you just painted for us when you talk about the foundational teaching that finds you in session 16, which you call self-generating fields of experience. And you write, we are self-generating fields of energy in a living universe. We generate energy by making choices, and the universe responds to this energy. That's what you were just describing with the lake. In complex and subtle ways, we are always creating our own experience. And then you add, we control the flow of energy out from and back into our lives. What comes to us from without originates from within. The more one moves towards one's center and engages the deeper levels of one's conditioning, the more one becomes conscious of being the source of one's experience. I suppose that's what you were describing now in the way that insight continues to evolve with you. It's a powerful synthesizing of the human journey, whether you do any psychedelics or not, because that insight is true in the normal day-to-day consciousness. You don't need to be in an altered state to realize it, and or you can discover the edge of your own experience and realize that you actually are the catalyst of what it is that the universe brings to you.
Absolutely. I really hope that what I've shared in this book is used by and is useful to people who never take a psychedelic whatsoever, because in the end, psychedelics are not critical. My understanding is that psychedelics, and particularly the psychedelic that I used in my work, LSD, is an amplifier of consciousness. It does not give you any specific experiences. It's not a hallucinogen. It doesn't give you false visions. It amplifies consciousness. That's all it does. How you use that amplified consciousness, how you caretake it, how you protect it, isolate it, internalize it, meditate with it, and engage your mind during those hours of hypersensitivity is what determines the quality of the perception that emerges from that dialogue. So many people have written me and they said, I've never taken a psychedelic in my life. I've been meditating for 40 years. I understand what you're writing about. It really parallels my own experience and my own spiritual practice. And I say yes, because it's not about psychedelics. What we're exploring is the nature of consciousness to reveal the deeper truths of its own being and of the universe. And so this idea that we are self-generating fields of experience is an ancient idea. I mean, it really is at the core of the belief in karma and rebirth, that we are a learning system. We are born in circumstances of our choosing, of our destiny. We make choices in response to those circumstances. We learn in response to those circumstances, and in that process, we are changed. And when we die, that process doesn't end, but it continues. And so what I was experiencing was simply an escalated and intensified vision of that ancient teaching.
You then describe later a cosmic tour, and you say that for several hours, the consciousness that accompanied you took you on a tour of the universe to show you its work, and that it brought an overwhelming sense of homecoming. What did you discover about the universe through this tour, and what was this sense of homecoming?
Well, this was my 19th session, so by this time I was about 4 years into the work, and I had gone through ego death, and I had entered into what in the book I describe as the ocean of suffering, kind of the hell realms of the collective psyche, where the collective psyche stores its most torturous memories of the history of the species. And I had navigated that, and as almost the gift or the grace of, because I had volunteered to participate in a healing of some aspect of the collective psyche, the universe gave me this gift, many gifts at that time, and one of them was this cosmic tour, where it would take me, and this is where I wish I had degrees in physics so I would be able to concretize or conceptualize some of the things it was showing me. But over and over again, it took me and showed me some aspect of our cosmic reality, and I was overwhelmed repeatedly by the genius of it, by the intelligence of it, by the intentionality of it. It taught me a lot about reincarnation. It taught me about the reincarnation patterns of our species, not just individuals, but of the dynamics of collective reincarnation. It took me into some of the formation structures of galaxies. And then, I'm not sure whether it was this particular part or in the immediately next, it took me, I would go through a succession of death and rebirth processes internal to this tour. And it took me into deeper and deeper levels of ontological simplicity. And I began to experience a deeper and deeper quiet beyond any quiet I had ever imagined. And saturating this silence was a sense of homecoming, deeper and deeper levels of homecoming. And at one particular transition, I went into this extraordinary peace, extraordinary homecoming, and I was overwhelmed by how sad it was that we had lost contact with this innate quality of our own being at this cosmic level. And I asked what had happened. And it said, this voice that was that the consciousness I was with said, we had left time, we left time. And then it said, we never intended so many to get caught in time. It was as if linear time was simply one of the experiments that the universe was having. So somehow moving deeper into home also meant moving beyond the conditions of space and time. So this was a universe, a tour, not only of the physical universe, but it was a tour of the levels of reality behind the universe that kind of give birth to space and time itself. And we come from these realities. Our substance is made from these realities. So we participate inside the divine creation of space and time as a spiritual being who is rooted in these spiritual realities.
And we will get further to both the divine reality and the various cycles of death and rebirth, but just to pick where you started there, the sense of suffering that you were describing, what do you understand, stepping back and looking at the way you interpret the experience, what do you understand to be the significance of suffering and the place of suffering in the evolutionary process? Why is suffering part of the evolutionary process?
That really is a core question, isn't it? It's a deep question, and it's a hard question to answer without preparing the ground well. And preparing the ground well would take much longer than we have room for here. So I'm going to have to take shortcuts, and I'm going to have to ask the indulgence of your listener. During this same period of the cosmic tour, during the same year when I was being given a crash course in Cosmology 101, I was taken back to what appeared to be the beginning of creation itself, the beginning of time and space. And I experienced an overwhelming love, just completely saturating me and just overwhelming me. It was a cosmic love. And then I experienced all of evolution, the birth of space and time, and all the evolution of space and time taking place inside this love. And this love was holding it and guiding it. And because of experiences that I had, I knew that evolution involved tremendous suffering, terrible suffering, not just for the human race, but for species up and down the evolutionary line. But let's just focus on the human race. I knew history, and I knew how much harm we had done to each other, and how much harm the planet had done to us, and how much suffering was involved. And in this experience, I experienced all of this suffering as something that humanity had taken on as by free choice, and by free choice motivated by the divine love of creation that lies behind creation, so that the suffering that is inevitable in an evolutionary project which is stretched across billions of years was not something which was being done to us. It was not a punishment. It was not being inflicted on us. It was not the work of demonic forces, but it literally was a burden that we had consciously chosen in order to participate in this creative project. Now, why is there so much suffering? There are layers and layers of a response to this. One of them is we make choices. Sometimes we make good choices. Sometimes we make bad choices. We learn by inheriting the consequences of our choices. And sometimes we inherit bad consequences from bad choices. But I think the answer is much deeper, goes much deeper than that. In order to understand why human beings suffer, we have to have some understanding of what a human being is, and more importantly, what a human being is becoming. we are not finished as a species. We are just beginning. We only develop sufficient consciousness to reach our minds down to the source of our own mind about 5,000 years ago. We're going to be evolving for millions and billions of years yet. We are not finished. We are just getting started. Much of the suffering inherent in human existence has to do with the unfinished nature of our own evolutionary process. There will come a time, I'm sure, that we will have sufficient consciousness and sufficient self-control that we will be able to wash disease out of our body through complete control of our mind. But we're not there yet. We will be capable of so many things that we are not capable of now, but that all of the things we are going through now are part of not only the learning exercise, but the building exercise of building a form of human being much more advanced than the form of human being we are today. Just as Homo sapiens is more advanced than Homo erectus, which is more advanced than our ancient ancestors in the primate kingdom. So I think the core, the deepest level of the answer to your question, what is the role of suffering in evolution? The deepest level is that it's simply a burden that we take on voluntarily to participate in the joy of creating the universe, of creating our species in the universe, and that in the end, it benefits us. It's in some ways like the suffering that a woman takes on when she gives birth. She knows it's coming. She does it voluntarily. It's absolutely terrible. It's really horrendous. But when she holds her child, it's worth it. And I think that's true for evolution too. There will come a time when we will have evolved to a point where we will look back on the entire history of all that pain without diluting it, without denying it. And we will say it was worth it in order to become what we have become today.
So central ethos in this is recognizing that we are involved in an unfinished project, as you say. Evolution, the universe, is an evolving, unfinished project. And you're making right there in your journey some potent points about the cost of existence and of the physical universe. And in that context, as you just framed it now, and this entire appreciation of the visible universe as it contains only small parts of the universe, so which for us, for all intents and purposes, the dimensions that you are describing, that you said you wish you had astrophysics in your degrees in education, some of those dimensions is what scientists today describe as dark energy and dark matter, which I intuit we can anticipate is a very crude, primitive definition of the so much more that is going to be discovered once we are prepared to reintegrate the greater realities of consciousness and human possibility and escape this idea that the universe is a machine that just reproduced the same. But as you describe and just painted the sense of the physical universe, you are making a very important point, which is that the universe is not, physical universe is not a trap, not a punishment that we have fallen into or from, and that there is this purpose inherent in the totality of life, which you describe as the continual transformation, the continual growth. So for me, what you're describing there is a lucid and beautiful distinction about the project, the evolutionary project, which you just narrated again. What else must we, whether you choose to do any psychedelic or any other expedition to altered states, what else must we understand about that relationship of the universe at large, the physical universe, and us as agents of the cutting edge, the leading edge of this process?
Boy, you're asking good questions. Let me step back and put this in a context. all of the religions of the last 5,000 years, what I call the axial age religions, all came into existence, 3,000 years ago. When we first began to get underneath our individual consciousness and tap into spiritual consciousness, tap into the consciousness of the universe or the consciousness of the divine. All of the religions of this era, both Western and Eastern religions, are examples of what I would call an up and out cosmology. And I understand their intention. When you begin to experientially touch your divine essence, it is so ecstatic filled, so bliss filled, so much more satisfying than physical existence that how could you not but think that you belong there more than here? And so all the theologies that we're given birth to in this period are theologies of return, which basically say we don't belong on earth, we belong in heaven. Somehow through some mishap or some misfortune or punishment, we're here, but what we want to do is get out of here and get back to there. And whether it's by Western concepts of salvation, being saved by faith, or Eastern concepts of reincarnation, where you evolve until you wake up spiritually. And when you wake up, the Hindus say, they call that moksha, escape, because you escape back to spiritual paradise. So the whole agenda of the axial age religions is to achieve some type of catharsis which allows you to abandon time and space and to return home. But that leaves open the fundamental question. What is the purpose of time and space? What is the purpose of the entire created order? When we were thinking that the universe might be only 6,000 years old, as many of we did in ancient times, you might justify an up and out cosmology. But now that we understand much more how big our universe is, how old it is, and how brilliant it is, and how filled with genius, the idea that spiritual awakeness, spiritual fruition should result in leaving the physical universe just doesn't ring true as powerfully. It doesn't have the same appeal. And I think what's happening is we are now growing up enough to recognize, to understand that first vision, but to see that it's actually a very incomplete cosmology. Because now we're beginning to understand that the next step after waking up, or the step of waking up to the reality of one's divine nature and the co-participation, the coexistence of divinity and physicality itself as an aspect of divinity, then that opens up the possibility of waking up and then bringing heaven to earth, bringing truly the ecstatic experience of heavenly consciousness into time-space reality, and building and truly shaping the physical world in a way to be a reflection and an embodiment of spiritual paradise. And that's where we find the importance of emergent spirituality, of a embodied spirituality, this theme which is becoming more and more prevalent. It's not an escapist spirituality. It's an embodied spirituality. And psychedelics, if they give us a sensitivity, it's not about getting up and out. It's really about getting more and more deeply within, to open up, to bring it in deeper and deeper and deeper within. And so then the question becomes, okay, now if we understand that, if that speaks truth to us, if we feel that that's true, how can we do this? And then the question becomes, well, now we're talking practicalities.
Yes. Well, so before we transition to that, this axial vision that you describe of the two worlds described in different religious texts in a variety of different ways. So you're really narrating in your experience an updating of that theological, cosmological view when you describe the sense of two cosmic beings one that had the nature of a he and one that had the nature of a she, and you describe the feminine cosmic being, if I get that correctly, as the one that devoted itself to the creation of time and space and the physical manifestation. And it's partnering intelligence in the he, holding that other part of that compassionate communion of love. Describe what that insight was and how it builds on what you were just narrating, that this next phase of evolution in what you were proposing is actually those two parts of the cosmic process getting integrated and interpenetrating into each other such that they liberate each other of their loneliness.
I want to be careful, and I want to remind us that a finite mind does as best as it can to give cognitive structure to transcendent experiences. So what I'm about to describe is, in terms of, just as you summarized it, a splitting of the divine principle into two halves, a male half that stays outside of time and space in a transcendent position, and a female half that begins the process of manifesting time and space in the entire physical cosmos. Now, I don't literally think in terms of male-female in this way, but this is the best my mind could come up with to understand. So it's the principle that's important. The principle is that not all of the creative intelligence manifests as physical reality. Some of it stays and holds the position outside physical reality. So there is a spiritual reality which gives birth to physical reality. My experience was, now as we are growing up through thousands and thousands of years, millions of years of evolution, we finally have reached the point where physical reality is sufficiently conscious that it can return to transcendent reality and not merge, but enter into communion, to consummate a return. And this return doesn't lead to an up and out exit, but this return leads to the divine wedding, the divine marriage, the infusion, deeper and deeper infusion of the transcendent divine and the eminent divine. I think of this as kind of like white light, the transcendent divine, and the immanent divine is kind of green light, green energy. So when the white energy and the green energy fuse, we have awakened, resplendent physical existence with a consciousness that far transcends what we have known up to this point in time. And I think we see this in the lives of the great mystics, the lives of the great spiritual teachers. They are living a absolutely grounded physical life, and yet they are also living a profoundly spiritual life simultaneously. And from that perspective, the Buddhists say nirvana is samsara. Samsara, the world of form, and nirvana, the world of transcendence. Those are not two separate realities. Those are now coexistent realities in our lives. That is embodied spirituality.
And I would say that one of the ways for us to describe this is that we are engaged in the project of spiritualizing this world. We don't need to go to another world to gain the spiritual experience. We are in the physical form to help spiritualize this world. Part of the report from these journeys that you're offering us is a validation that indeed we have entered a time where you don't need to be a high lama or just the special priest. It actually is an invitation for humanity at large to each in our own way become participant in what you called earlier the fellowship of learning, and then become involved in the evolutionary project. So I want here now to start to make the next transition for you to describe the realization of the relationship between the personal awakening and the collective awakening, and how you have gone through these different cycles of death and rebirth through this experience, and the significance of these, and how do they facilitate collective awakening.
Well, first, what I'm going to describe is my variation on an ancient teaching. In Buddhism, for example, when one sits down to meditate or do some form of spiritual practice, the first thing they do is cultivate what is called bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is the wish to save all sentient beings. So you do this practice not for your personal benefit, you do it to nourish the uplifting of the whole of creation. The last thing you do at the end of your practice is what's called distribution of the merit. You give all the blessings you've acquired. You don't try to hold them to yourself. You give them away. So everything you're doing in mature spiritual practice is not for your personal benefit. It's for the benefit of the whole. These ideas show up in the spiritual traditions up and down the line. So the way this showed up in my practice, in my psychedelic practice, I began my psychedelic practice thinking that this was part of a personal transformation. So I would go through some purification process, some death rebirth process that would result in my personal healing and my personal liberation, perhaps, or something, but it was always sort of personally referenced. But what happened was, after about 2 years, after I had gone through a lot of personal cleansing and had relived my own birth and gone through a death rebirth process and had my earth identity shattered, I entered into a new cycle of very, very intense purification processes, but they were not personal. They were collective. They systematically got larger and larger for 2 years until they included the experiences of hundreds, millions of human beings over thousands of years. And there were periods of just intense agony and suffering and violence. And at first I thought this must be some form of a deeper ego death. But it went on for so long, and it involved so many beings, that eventually I came to a new way of thinking about it, and it was very challenging. It took me years to even admit this possibility. But what I came to eventually was the conviction that in these sessions, I was not working to heal or transform my individual being, but I was being used cooperatively to heal and transform my entire human family. That the pain that I was engaging was not part of my personal pain or even my reincarnational soul pain, but it was part of the pain of humanity's history itself. That this pain of history was lodged in the collective psyche, just as my personal pain might be lodged in my personal psyche. Humanity's collective pain was lodged and stuck in the collective psyche, and somehow, by becoming as large as these sessions allowed me to become, I was able to take on this suffering and to digest it, just as at an earlier time I had taken on and digested my personal suffering. As a result of making this choice, of allowing this to happen, the universe began to not only take me deeper into its pain, which lasted about 2 years, and then there was a crescendo, and then it was finished. I was not taken back into this territory anymore. I went beyond. But the universe took me deeply into a spiritual awakening process, which was, again, not personal. It was collective. It began to take me into the future, into what I came to call deep time, and it took me there not as an individual, but as a field of energy, somehow encompassing large swaths of the collective psyche. And I had repeatedly this experience that there is no ultimate membrane between the individual and the collective, between the individual and the species. Everything that the individual is a distillation of something that's going on in the species. And the species is the collection of everything that's going on in its individual manners. Pick any problem, any issue that anybody is working on in their life, and they would not have that issue if it weren't for some pattern of this issue that's really touching the lives of many, many people in the human family. So that I learned over and over again in many different settings and contexts that the work of spiritual transformation of the individual and the work of spiritual transformation of the collective as a whole are all intertwined, and there are no absolute boundaries. There are relative boundaries, but there are no absolute boundaries. So that my book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, I describe this in terms of the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is a very, very intense period of spiritual purification that takes place before the individual mystic awakens into spiritual realization. But here I was talking about the dark night of our collective soul, that humanity as a whole is going through a dark night, a period of profound purification, which I think by analogy is a period which is leading up to a profound spiritual awakening for humanity as a whole. Many people have said this, we are past the age of individuals' enlightenment. Now we either become enlightened as a species, we either wake up as a species, or we're going to lose this planet. Yeah. And so my work has been about collective transformation, not personal transformation so much.
And implicit inside this insight is also the idea that anybody, you can choose to work on your individual struggle or on your individual healing. And when you work on the individual, you can choose devotionally or by sentiment or by a frame of mind, recognize that your work on yourself is part of your contribution to the whole. And if you make that internal inclusion and integration, you become part of the fellowship of learning and healing, and essentially you opt in to the evolutionary project.
Yeah. Now, you are in the evolutionary project, whether or not you recognize it, whether or not you opt in, you are part in it, you are hardwired into it. But if you recognize it, then you can consciously participate, and that deepens and enriches that process.
And then as the journey continued, you moved from the personal to the collective and to the archetypal and to the higher archetypal dimension. Describe what these realms and these cycles of death and rebirth meant for you in this discovery.
Well, after 2 years of working in what I came to call this collective suffering, the ocean of suffering, and experiencing the blessings of insights that were also coming in a chapter I called The Initiation into the Universe, where I was given these teachings of Cosmology 101. The suffering kind of reached a culmination. It's hard to describe, but it was kind of a collective breakthrough. And then it spun me into a level of reality that was stunningly old. It was ancient. And for the next year and a half, it kept bringing me back now. It's always progressive, so it would take me back to that level of reality. And every time I entered that reality, what was stunning about it was ancient, and it was more real than physical time-space was. And that's very disorienting, to think that there is a reality which is more real than physical reality. It just completely shattered me, but it was such a consistent part, I had no choice but to yield and give into that.
So part of your struggle in the journey must have been the How do you stabilize these insights and awarenesses when you need to come back to teach in the classroom and be a family man and all the rest of that?
Wherever I was on Saturday in my inner work, on Monday I was back in the classroom teaching my courses, which is part of the very grounding. It's really, really important. If you're going to go deep, you have to be grounded. You have to have a lifestyle of commitment to grounded practice. And for me, that grounding was provided by my family and by my teaching, my students, always. But it is difficult. And there's one thing I'll mention, that every time you break through to a new level of reality, it's cognitively very confusing. You don't understand what you're experiencing at first. And when you write up your description, it has gaps and fragments. But if you go back again and again to that level of reality, eventually your mind learns to adapt to it. And you begin to be more capable of having more coherent experiences there. So in the beginning, your write-ups maybe have holes in them, but with repetition, those holes are filled in and you have more complete pictures. And this is part of what I mean by cultivating the philosophical discipline that's required to have coherent, sustained experiences of deeper levels of reality. The second part that's required is, and this is again, this applies at multiple levels of the adventure, higher levels of reality, or deeper levels, let's say, of reality, are higher levels of energy. Every deeper level of reality functions at a higher level of energy. So when I made the transition into archetypal reality, I went through huge purification processes in which I was dissolved into white-hot lava, plunged into burning suns, just tremendous fields of energy that just burning more and more out of me. And if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have been able to have coherent consciousness, because you have to become a being that can live at that level for hours at a time, even only temporarily, in order to have coherent cognition at that level. Yeah. So to enter into archetypal reality, it takes
to capture the principle you're describing there, because that would be the case not just in the psychedelic experience, but in any developmental journey. Because if you are to embrace larger and more potent realms, then there are several processes that will have to take place. For a start, what you are describing is you being rewired on the inside, because there are different circuitries in your brain and in the energy field that you are that get activated, get switched on in the process. And then secondarily, once you're engaging with higher level of potency, what you describe as purification process, your system need to cleanse, need to actually release any of the residue of the previous infrastructure that you were part of, because what you're describing, that the universe is a compassionate, loving actuality, but it's not socialistic environment. Rather, it is a gradient. It has levels and dimensions, and those can sometimes interpenetrate, but there are also containers that, for the sanctity of their and the fidelity of their process, they must be retained. And if you are as a human vessel to enter these realms, your system, your physical system, need to be rewired and updated to be able to manage that. And the 51% of the work is actually stabilizing the work that you got exposed to. That's how I would translate what you just shared through my lens of non-psychedelic experience, but engaged on the cutting edge of the spiritual and developmental journey.
Absolutely. And all we're seeing is a particular variation of a universal pattern, that if you want to open to deeper truths and to a deeper participatory relationship with the universe, you have to empty yourself of everything which is keeping you small. You have to empty yourself of old ways of thinking, old ways of feeling. And all of these thoughts and feeling patterns have biological correlates. So you go through a detoxification process, which is physical as well as mental and emotional. When a monk in Tibetan Buddhism wants to receive higher levels of teachings which are capable of generating awakening or enlightenment, they must first do what's called nundro, the preparatory practices, which are the 500 preparatory practices. There are 5 practices you do 100,000 times each. And one of those practices is doing full body prostrations while reciting prayerful mantras. So you're going on the ground, you're lying down, you're getting up, you're praying, you're going on the ground, you're lying up, and you're not only retuning your mind with these mantras, and you're retuning your heart with the devotion of these mantras, but you literally are working your body and working your body to purify your body while you are purifying your mind and your heart. And this is the way it is for all spiritual practice, isn't it? We always are having to purify ourselves. And if psychedelics push you into a higher state of consciousness kind of quickly, you then have to purify after you go into that state of consciousness.
You either need to pay on the front end or during or after.
Yeah.
There is no
pay me now or pay me later. Yeah. But you have to pay. Yeah.
The one distinction I'd make, and I'm interested in your comment, is so some of those Buddhist practices, they emerged in ancient times. What we're describing is that humanity has now entered an environment, a universal environment, where you may be able to go through an accelerated journey, not just in the way you have done that journey, but because in metaphoric terms or in actual terms, we can say the universe has drawn nearer to the human realm. That's part of the epochal shift that we are experiencing at this time, such that because of what you're describing, that we have entered the phase of collective awakening, we may be in one lifetime we may be able to go through an accelerated journey, especially when we engage with the exercise, not through the lens of the individual, but as part of the bigger project of the humanity participating in the evolutionary process.
Yeah. And so if you open your individual life, whether it's a spiritual practice or psychological transformation, or even as you engage diseases in your physical body to this larger collective landscape, then I think you participate in this evolutionary project in a new and intense fashion. Also, if you are engaged in social transformation, if you're trying to working for social justice, working for true equality in our healthcare delivery systems and so on and so forth, with a conscious understanding that this is the time we must change our culture, we must change our historical practices, we must let go of the divisions of the history, we must lay a foundation for a future that worked for all of its citizens, not just for some of its citizens, then that too, even if you're not meditating, even if you're not doing those internal practices, if you're a social activist, then that too is part of this larger, deep transformation. And I think you're right. I think what we're finding is in spiritual practitioners and visionaries in many different lineages are coming to the same conclusion that everything is speeding up. That our evolution is speeding up, and humanity is coming to a critical pivot point, a bifurcation point, a point of critical instability, that we either grow up or we probably go extinct. But we cannot continue to manage the planet with the lower level of consciousness that we have been operating out of in the past. We have to achieve a breakthrough of depth and breadth in order to grow up to the species that's been growing inside of us for thousands of years. And I understand this in terms of reincarnation. It's like we've been reincarnating and reincarnating and reincarnating. We've been learning bits and pieces, learning and learning and learning. And I think what's happening is, as the world is trying to become an integrated whole as a planet, we're dealing with problems, the magnitude of which we cannot solve at a local level. They have to be solved at a global level. Likewise, individually, intrapsychically, we are bringing together all of the lives and all of the karma from all of our previous lives. We have lived in every race. We have been every race on the planet. We have been every religion. We have been every nationality. We have all these lives inside of us. And now, whereas in the past, the world has torn itself apart, nation against nation, race against race. Likewise, all these divisions are inside of us. And as we become one and whole, we fuse that history into one integrated being. And in that process, we support humanity that is fusing its past into one integrated being, and that's giving birth to what I call the diamond soul, a fully awakened soul consciousness.
Just before we get to the diamond revelation and experience, what bridging will you offer? I mean, what you just framed there is that a way to view the meta-crisis unfolding in just any and every aspect of life on the planet right now, we can choose to view it as the living crucible, the initiatory crucible of this evolutionary project, in a way forcing us to realize that we can't do it on our own, we have to come together. So what bridging comment will you offer about that journey where you appreciate the archetypal and earlier on, and through that you come to some vision of the birth of the future human, that new species that's arising? What else, what other scaffolds you want to put there before we explore the sense of diamond luminosity?
Well, what I share with you now doesn't come from an intellectual basis. It doesn't come from books I've read. And I wish I could give it that and give you footnotes and, that type of documentation that academics love to give. But I have to speak to you only out of my spiritual experiences, only out of my psychedelic experiences. And over the course of this long journey, I was plunged into a series of initiations and visionary experiences. And what I shared in that last statement is basically simply what was given to me, what was shown me with consistency, that humanity is coming into a critical time, a critically unstable time, a bifurcation time, a bifurcation point, that the world was entering into a global crisis that seemed to be driven by a cascading series of ecological crises, that these ecological crises were hitting us again and again and causing a profound breakdown, a breakdown that already many people see it coming, and it is so severe, many very wise people think that it's an extinction event. We are really going extinct as a species. We will not be able to survive what's coming. My experience as a visionary in the psychedelic condition is that is not what's going to happen, that we are coming into a time of acute suffering, acute dismantling, a surrendering of the past. But in that process, we will give birth to something extraordinary, not simply a new civilization or a new culture, and not simply a new economics or a new industrial production, a green production. We are literally giving birth to the next form of the human being, the future human. And I couldn't have dreamed this up. I couldn't have made this up. But it's been to me a vision which was given me starting in the early 90s, culminating in 1995. And it was given to me not as a visionary experience of what will be, but after great work, I was taken into what I call deep time and taken into the future, taken into whole time, and was experienced this transformation that humanity is undergoing as what has happened. all simultaneously what will happen, but also what has happened.
Well, time is non-linear, so you could be in those different positions and experiences concurrently.
Yes, and so for me, it is out of that basis that I say this is an initiatory event. It is not an extinction event. It is a process that we will go through. Now, we can go through it kind of clumsily and awkwardly and dragging our heels, or we can go through it cooperatively with vision and foresight, and we can accelerate our way through it, or we can fight it and make it'll become worse. Right? That's our choice. I mean, you said we all grow. We either get dragged through, or we walk through with elegance. And that's our choice now. Do we go forward with vision, or do we try to hold on to the past, or try to go back to some time in history when things were easier, they made sense, or do we forge ahead into a new future?
So this must have been, and in many ways you described that sense, the realization of that, the feeling, experience, communion of that, and the calling that makes that became a driving issue. Just stabilizing that and operating in life was, I imagine, a challenge by itself. When you speak of it now, it lives in you as powerfully and as passionately, all while you communicate that this is an experience and a set of insights that you must contain, because it's not about jumping on rooftops and screaming. It actually is about containing and giving birth to the realization of these extraordinary shape-shifting events that are unfolding right as we speak on the global stage, and that these are theaters of experience through which the individual, the collective, the archetypal consciousness that the human experience represents can be transformed to become participatory in the evolutionary process.
Yes, exactly. When I first had this kind of culminating breakthrough after years of these visions, and I experienced the death and rebirth of humanity, it took me about a year to recover. It was such a powerful experience. It was like, as I say in the book, it was like walking around Hiroshima a week before the bomb was dropped. And I had such profound compassion and such deep respect for every person that I was seeing, because my understanding was that each one of us chose to incarnate at this time in history, knowing what we were getting into, knowing that it was going to be hard, knowing that it was going to be very, very difficult. But there are no victims here. There are only saints. There are only volunteers who have chosen to participate in this. And that every person here, whether or not I agree with them politically, or whether, whatever our differences may be, every person here deserves my complete respect, because they are a soul who has chosen to participate in this historic transformation.
And then you were led later into the diamond luminosity and its discovery. Describe that transition, please.
Well, I have to back up just a little bit, because I described going into archetypal reality, and I haven't described too much about what went on there, but let's just kind of jump over that. And then I went through another death and rebirth process, and then I entered what I came to call causal mind, or the universe experienced in a condition of consciousness where everything is one. Mm-hmm. That all the diversity of life pulses as a single life form, just a single totality, an overwhelming, absorbing experience in the fundamental oneness of life, where my boundary is dissolved completely, not only my personal boundaries, but I saw that there were no boundaries from this perspective throughout the entire universe, that we all were aspects of this fundamental oneness. And I experienced what the Buddhists call shunyata, emptiness of self, transparency, There was another session where I was taken into the cosmic void, into the fertile void out of which the universe emerged, an experience of overwhelming cosmic love. And that went on for a year. I just was absorbed in extraordinary blessings. And I was completely satisfied. As a philosopher, I was totally satisfied. And then I went through yet another death rebirth experience, a very intense death rebirth experience. And when I came through it, I was taken into a consciousness of clear light. I had known light many times before. Light had shown up in many death rebirth processes, but this was different. This was an exceptionally hyper clear luminosity. And I came to call it the diamond light, the diamond luminosity. And when I looked at other sources in the spiritual literature, again, Buddhism is one of the ones I know the best. And when I studied the Buddhist literature, I think this is what they call Dharmakaya, the clear light of absolute reality. It is a light so clear that it eventually becomes invisible, but it's just crystalline clear. And in that clarity, there is an ecstasy that goes beyond bliss, beyond any of the ecstasy associated with form, because this is pure formlessness. Once I touched this, then the only thing I wanted to do was get back to it. I mean, once you touch this kind of diamond luminosity, everything else becomes insignificant. And over the next 4 years and 26 sessions, I only went back into the diamond luminosity 4 times, about once a year. And in between those 4 sessions, there was sessions of intense purification, more, so on and so forth. In the middle of that cycle, I had the experience of the Great Awakening, the experience of the death and rebirth of humanity. So the diamond luminosity work started, developed. Then I had the experience of the future awakening of humanity. And then I went back into 2 more years of work with 2 more initiations into the diamond luminosity. In the first 2 sessions, I went deeper and deeper into the diamond luminosity. And then in the last 2, the diamond luminosity crunched itself deeper and deeper into my physical body, into my mind. And I experienced it kind of remaking me almost at a cellular. I don't understand the process, but it was infused, it was entering into my body, so that eventually it changed not only how I think and how I feel, it gave me a brief glimpse in my very, very last session of a change in my vision. I had an experience of seeing 100 times clearer, 100 times more refined than I had ever seen in my ordinary consciousness. And it wasn't a hallucination, it was what I came to call diamond vision. And then after about 10 minutes, it disappeared and I was back to my ordinary clear vision. And that's when I began to understand that the future human that we are giving birth to is not only a human being with a healed and expansive heart, and not only a human being with an open mind, open to deeper communion with the universe, but it's a human being which lives physically differently. All of our senses are not simply biomechanical processes. They are functions of the level of consciousness we hold within the body. And so our vision is capable of infinitely more refinement than in our hearing and our tastes and our touches. So when we talk about bringing heaven to earth, it's not simply like, a social, nice harmony, social, we're talking about weaving divine consciousness, activating divine consciousness inside our body so that our body becomes profoundly satisfying, capable of much, much more refined sensory experience not just emotional and physical.
What you're describing there, building on everything you said earlier, is the universe is interested not just in altered human consciousness. It wants that consciousness to permeate all the levels of physical reality, such that the universe can experience through us the sensory portal and the mental portal and the embodied experience, all at a richer, higher fidelity, higher quality kind of a way.
Yes, and I would say the way I think of this is not so much that it can experience, though I'm sure that's true, but I think it's actually sharing with us the gift of its capacity. It's literally kind of cloning itself. It's sharing the gift of how it experiences life with us, and it's growing us and growing us to allow us to incarnate and embody its experience of life at deeper and deeper levels. And that means it's an act of generosity.
Well, Chris, this has been a fascinating exploration, and I so much appreciate that you're able to both narrate your experience, integrate into it your teaching and spiritual practice, and also talk to it from the extemporaneous experience of this moment in time of being a conscious being on this tormented planet as humanity is going through these very difficult transitional events. But what makes the whole difference? I mean, the teaching from Viktor Frankl is when you're in the most difficult circumstance, if you carry with you a different logotherapy, a different reason, a different purpose, a different awareness, a different recognition and insight about what it is that you are undergoing, whether it's illness, whether it's pain about the greater planetary situation, there is a difference. Because do we experience what we experience merely personally, or do we experience the personal dimension while we are merged inside that greater actuality? And that search, that inquiry, that struggle is actually part of the spiritual work of this time, which you discovered through psychedelics. My experience is it's accessible in the day-to-day tasking of life, of being a parent and a spouse and a teacher and a leader, and working through the day-to-day struggles of life and asking, how can I make the higher choices? How can I be the better version of myself? How can I find resources to transcend the moment of conflict, to metabolize and transmogrify the moment of being triggered, to, instead of acting out on being triggered, to use it as a trampoline to engage with the higher cosmic universal dimension of life. That's the invitation that I hear in your narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Psychedelics are totally incidental. They're simply how I encountered these principles, and one can encounter these principles in so many different forms, in so many contexts. As we enter this dark night of our collective soul, which I think has begun, and it's going to get worse. But as we enter it, we're going to hear people say all sorts of things. They're going to offer all sorts of interpretations that we're being punished, or this is the end of time, and this is, that we're being plagued by demons, and or this is a punishment that is owed to us. And I think it's very important that we have a deep vision of what is being produced, what is taking place in history, a vision of the future human that we are in the process of giving birth to inside ourselves and collectively. Imagine a woman who's giving birth and she doesn't know that she's pregnant, and she doesn't know anything about labor or what's actually taking place. What a horrible day it would be. But if she understands that she's giving birth to a new life, then it all kind of coheres. To see the intelligence of the universe and the compassion of the universe, you have to look very, very deep, because on the surface, the universe does not appear to be very compassionate, and it doesn't appear to be very intelligent. It appears to be a really brutal being. To see that compassion, you have to understand existence at a very, very deep level. And as we enter this time in history, particularly this century, we have to be capable of looking very, very deeply. And when we look deeply, then we cooperate with that process of transformation. It doesn't require psychedelics at all. But when we participate and cooperate with the challenges that we are living in our immediate life, in our immediate circumstances, and we find our way to the highest good, the highest choices, the greatest good for the greatest number, then we feed into good outcome for the delivery of this future human, both in our own life and in the lives of our children and our grandchildren and to future generations.
Thank you for your commitment to the inquiry and for your generosity. This has been an extraordinary journey with you today. Thank you.
And Aviv, thank you for your work. Thank you for the work you're doing in the world. This is really noble and important work. Thank you for our conversation.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.